All right, what's up, and welcome back to the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast, everybody. We are so honored and excited today to be introducing a very special guest. He is the 3DMJ Chief Science Officer and Coach. He is a host of the Iron Culture podcast, who we are avid listeners of, um, and has a number of other things to his name, a doctorate degree in strength and conditioning. He's a pro natural bodybuilder, power lifter, dabbles in Olympic lifting, competed in strongman last year, lots of other things. Dare I say, influencer in the evidence-based practice space. But we're super excited to have him on today. And we'll get into what we're actually going to talk about in a second. But I just wanted to say thank you, Dr. Eric Helms, for coming on today to our show. And we're super excited to have you. If you wouldn't mind doing the honors of introducing yourself and your background to our audience.
No, absolutely. It's a true pleasure. I appreciate the introduction, and I will gladly take the title of influenza, as my colleague Omar would say. Um, yeah, I think to introduce myself, just to flesh out what you said, is I'm essentially just someone who got far too obsessed with lifting weights. It started as something of, being quote unquote bit by the iron bug and something I love doing. And then it became a way that I found an outlet for self expression, an intellectual pursuit, and then a career. And essentially, the pathway to becoming a very one dimensional person with very few life skills, but knows everything and more than is would ever needed to be known about lifting weights. So yeah, no, I'm in all seriousness, I'm a research fellow out here in New Zealand with the Auckland University of Technology, where I supervise master's and PhD students. So I conduct research, I write about it for mass, I talk about it in Iron Culture, and I advise people on how to best use it in their practice, like my colleagues at 3DMJ. And I, of course, try to integrate it into my own multi-varied strength and physique pursuits. So that's me, and it's an honor to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great introduction. And so we were coming up with what we wanted to talk about on our show today with you because we knew we wanted to have you on. We didn't actually think you would say yes, and then you did. So we were like, "Oh crap, let's figure out exactly what we want him to speak on because there are a lot of things that are under your expertise." But specifically, we kind of pinpointed either we wanted to talk about maybe your doctoral research, RPE progression in training, or maybe a more, I guess, higher level conversation about the muscle and strength pyramid. So these are a set of two books that Eric has authored that have been just a really great guide for a lot of people to know exactly what and why they're doing what they're doing with training and nutrition. And it really sets up a good foundation for critical thinking and not just taking things at face value. And I think that that's super important. um, so these are the muscle and strength pyramids, and they're exactly what they sound like. Some pyramids with different levels and increasing importance as you go down through the base of the pyramid. But I guess we can just intro this topic by asking you, Eric, what was the need in the industry at the time when you wrote these books, and kind of what was the background surrounding that?
No, that's a great question. And I actually like talking about the framing of this because these actually started as YouTube videos. The nutritional one I did in 2012, it was a series of videos that last between 15 to 20 minutes, where I created this hierarchy understanding of nutrition, a lens for people to set their priorities and what to focus on first. And what led to this was actually our Skype coaching program that we developed, the 3D Muscle Journey. So we started as pretty much just doing contest prep, working with physique athletes, helping them through their preps and their off seasons. And as we expanded and we got a little more popular, little known influenza named Matt Ogus, I got to work with, and all of a sudden we had this huge demand for non-competitors who had physique goals that were recreational. So we ended up deciding to start an off-season coaching list, and I don't think we realized how many requests we'd get. And we ended up with this huge backlog that we were just feeling terrible about. So our solution to that was to create this Skype program. Like, hey, we don't have the bandwidth right now to do one-on-one coaching with you like we do our athletes, but we're happy to do, say, every few months, we touch base, we write a program, we talk to you about your goals and what you know, what you don't know, what you're missing, what you have questions about. And one day my wife looked over to me and I'd finished my fourth Skype call of the week. And she was like, I feel like I could do your Skype calls. And I was like, you probably can, because everyone seems to have the same problem. Like, they have landed on us. They've come to 3D Muscle Journey, which means they're not in the, I'll say, the kind of the transient fitness market where you get bounced around a bunch of BS and then you finally go, all right, I need to find something that's more legitimate, and you trend to looking towards the evidence-based community. So it wasn't for lack of knowledge. They had come to us with some level of understanding, and they had knowledge about peri-workout nutrition. They had knowledge about the value of macronutrients, energy balance, the understanding of volume, intensity, everything I go over in the pyramid. But the nature of the way information is presented online, even in the evidence-based community, is that everything is always the most important thing when I write about it right now or when you watch it. We figured out how to take the best parts, best is a reasonable interpretation maybe, of the general fitness community that's good at marketing, but pretty light on content or actual utility, and going, all right, well, we need to have a little bit of that kind of walk in the fine line of clickbait to draw people in. And this at the time would have been things on like blogs and the burgeonings of YouTube. So people were basically operating on kind of a fear of missing out. It was like FOMO, like, oh shit, if I don't have the new supplement, or if I don't have peri-workout nutrition, or if I don't do this. And I would have people who knew everything, but did not know how to apply it and were just paralyzed by their neuroticism. And I ended up basically trying to help them be like, look, let's not get the cart before the horse. Let's focus on this first, that first, that first, that first. And it became so ubiquitous in my experience as a consultant that I was like, I'm really tired of doing this. I want to give people just like, go watch these videos. It'll solve all your problems. And then fast forward, 3 years later, I had done the training version of it as a video. And then fast forward a year after that, Andrea Valdez, who came on and got incorporated and is now our director of operations at 3DMJ, and she's worked with us for the last 6 years and it's been fantastic, suggested, these could be books and they'd be really good. And I saw that there was a colleague of mine, Andy Morgan, who is from the UK, living in Japan. He's really good at taking information and simplifying it. And he had made an article version of the pyramids. So there was clearly a demand. They were very popular. So there's clearly a demand. So I partnered with Andy and I partnered with Andrea, and we got together and we created the books, and they were much more successful than I would have anticipated. We thought they were going to be like a quick PDF curated type of guide, but they ended up being something that people were raving about. And it's so difficult for me to say that, but it made me realize just how rare it was that people were able to synthesize things and express them in a way that gave people a sense of priority, rather than the sense of being overwhelmed by all the potential pathways they could go that are quote unquote evidence-based. So I think that is the frame. That's why there's the hierarchy. That's why I was like, hey, we're going to build the foundation first, in the case of nutrition, for example, but we're going to worry about energy balance before we start worrying about top, say, supplements. So it's just one example, but that was the impetus and the motivation that drove them in the experiences.
Because you originally said that they started out as just transcribed, like you were transcribing the YouTube videos, right?
Yeah. So the way it started is Andrea saw these as a quick PDF we could sell for like, $5 and just make it easy so people could hit Control F, but it would just be a transcription. So the process was, all right, Andrea is going to watch the nutrition videos, put them down. Andy's already written articles about this on both sides. So we're just going to make it into a more readable format, change my wording. And then Eric, you go through and edit it. And then of course the perfectionist nature and the fact that I was now in the middle of my grad school and going to do my PhD, it started as like that was the skeleton that then grew organs and muscles. And by the way, great delts on this structure we're building, and like hair and like a career and like this whole life. So it became something that eventually had I think there's 400 references between the two of them in the second edition. There are appendices. They're not short books. They have become the everything I've learned and that I can feel comfortable communicating to people in terms of broad recommendations. But yeah, the intention originally was, let's make a PDF version of these videos and make it digestible for people.
Well, Marissa and I have the books, and we can say that you are correct, and they are not short. But I think you made a really good point when you talk about how, I feel like when at the time, there were magazines and there were articles and there were blogs, you can only write about the core things you should focus on for so long until it becomes redundant. And then it's like, well, what can we write about next? And so when you write an article about a brand new supplement, it's like, that's what you mean. It can just get so overwhelming. It's like all this new information when really it's just about simplifying it and focus on, and we actually had an interview the other day about like your mental capacity and how much you can handle at one time. And so focusing on one thing, getting that down, and then you can move on to the next thing. So I think that the pyramids are just a great visualization for people to focus, to see what they need to focus on first.
Yeah,
Thank you, Christina. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And
it's actually, sorry, Marissa, I was going to say, this is one of the very first things when I get a new client, it's like one of the first things that I reference them to, because it's like, this is what we need to focus on before we can start moving on. So it literally is one of the greatest things for new clients.
Yeah. And I was going to say exactly that, because that's the main complaint that I get when I see a new client come in and they're like, okay, I need you as a coach because there is just too much information. Like, I'm so confused. Everyone says that something else is the next best thing and that I have to focus on it all the time. And so being able to actually filter through that information is the biggest challenge today, because social media is so dominant. And everyone on social media who's ever lifted a weight is now shouting about what the best way to eat is or what the best way to train is. And so while I would love to, just have my coaching service to pawn off your books and be like, here, go read this, use them, and, get back to me when all your problems are solved.
I would also love that, for the record.
And then I'll get 5% commission, and that's our deal moving forward. No, but in all seriousness, like, while I would love to just throw those books at people and be like, here, go read this and like understand it, apply it, you're good, then comes the problem of like, okay, well, these people don't want to do that. So Christina and I, we mainly coach, and we do have some competitors, but we do mainly coach very general population clients, and they just want to live a healthier, sustainable lifestyle. And that's the goal of this podcast, is to help as many people as possible to live a healthier, sustainable lifestyle. So I think talking about these books and, in our practice, coaching people one-on-one and teaching them the principles of how to actually order out this information is one of the most important things that we can do, because I can already tell you probably 5 or 6 conversations that I've had this week one-on-one with clients about things like black and white thinking, good and bad foods, better or worse ways to train. And, I had a client yesterday tell me that, she's like, I want to eat more fruit, and I know it's good for me, but every time I like pick up a piece of fruit, I'm like, oh, that's so much sugar. But I know that Marissa said that, we have to focus on, just getting in more fruits and vegetables and just overall calorie adherence first. But it's like they have these walls up and they have these heuristics that they've been relying on for so long, because they've just been shouted at for 10 years now on the internet.
I think another really good aspect of the pyramids is, I think, again, some people get so caught up in what their favorite influencers are doing, or they see this brand new supplement line, so they think that they need to be spending all this money on supplements, and that's why they kind of think that there's a barrier to health and fitness, because they feel like they're spending so much money. And so I think it's just a really good way to say, hey, before you focus on any of that, like, let's start here. Like, let's just start very, very basic. So I mean, that's one of the reasons I love it. It's because it helps them fine tune what really matters. Yeah,
the intention was always to create a framework to have the the ability to start a conversation. And I like that you guys are acknowledging the utility for non-competitors, because while I certainly wrote it in mind for my people, the us crazy people who like to get mostly naked in front of strangers competitively, or those of us who like to lift one thing that's really heavy once and then pretend we're athletes. Um, the the application, it's permissive, so you don't need to climb to the top of the pyramid. You don't need to scour every reference in that book or use every element if it is not if the juice is not worth the squeeze. For example, when I discuss volume in the training book, I talk about how you can do 10 plus sets per week, and on average that will net you a third more gains than only doing 1 to 5 sets per week. But you can also, and a bodybuilder would go, sweet, I definitely want 1/3 more gains. But a smart person who is not trying to live the life of bodybuilding would go, hold on, are you telling me I can do 1 set per muscle group per week and there's a decent chance I'll get like 2/3 of the effectiveness of someone doing 10 times as much work? And the answer is yes. So I think when your goal is to how to have the maximal impact on your life with the least consumption of neurotic materials and disruptions to the things you love, you get to decide and permit yourself to climb that pyramid as high as you want. And I tried to provide options of, hey, here are non-tracking options. If tracking your calories or tracking your food is a huge barrier, or even you have a poor relationship with, here are some other ways to do it. And then I have appendices on, and by the way, if you're getting on stage, here's how you manipulate every macronutrient in the final week, et cetera, et cetera. So while I am certainly more of an expert in physique and strength sport, many principles do overlap, of course, from a physiological basis. And I try to put them into practical terms in such a way that they could be applied regardless of the extremity of your goal, if that makes sense. And it's good to see and hear you guys reflect that it's useful with your clientele as well. So it's really encouraging.
Yeah. And I think I really like what you said about allowing yourself to climb up the hierarchy, because you don't have to. And a lot of the people listening here might not get past that second tier of macronutrients or volume, intensity, and frequency for training. And that's okay. And they're still going to make amazing progress doing that. And I think Christina and I do a lot of our work with our clients, just working on those first 2 levels. And so we haven't actually defined this yet. So I'm like getting into like all of these levels, and let's just give the audience here an overview of these 2 pyramids, what the levels are, and just kind of going over brief definitions of each level.
Absolutely. So we've got the nutrition pyramid, and it's a pyramid with multiple levels, but underneath it all, and what encompasses the whole thing, is behavior and lifestyle. And I always like to preface the pyramid layers with that, because it encompasses everything. And your behavior and lifestyle should be the foundation. And I like to keep that in there because anytime you start to track or measure or modify a variable, it comes sometimes at the cost potentially of a behavior and lifestyle that you've currently adopted. And you need to think of that as a coach, or even just for yourself, that there is a cost to changing these things, that a diet is not necessarily a neutral thing to do. There is, people develop eating disorders, people develop body image issues, people can have very negative experiences if the diet is set up poorly. Or maybe if they shouldn't be dieting, but they're forging ahead. So I think that is always should be the overarching theme, is behavior and lifestyle. And there's an equivalent for training that I'll get into. And then the base of the pyramid, the idea is, if these are, again, the muscle and strength pyramids, so this has to do with modifying body composition or strength, is going to be energy balance. So understanding the simple concept that if I want to change my body mass, and if I want to change my body composition, it's going to be most importantly achieved by whether or not I'm in a calorie surplus or a calorie deficit, if my goals are to add mass to my body or reduce mass from my body. From there, the next layer is, well, what is the contribution to that energy surplus or deficit, or maybe just not eating in either, but at maintenance and trying to do a recomp? And that is the various macronutrients. So that's protein, carbs, fat. And these are going to have a significant difference, depending even in the same surplus or deficit. If you had a low or high protein diet, for example, or if you had a very, very low or very, very high fat diet or carbs, but they don't have as much of an impact. They don't change thermodynamics in terms of actual mass changes. So that's why they're next up the pyramid, but they're still, like you said, they might encompass pretty much everything someone looks at, whereas they're primary things they change. And after that is micronutrients. And this is, of course, incredibly important. Like, you wouldn't want to have a deficiency in a vitamin or a mineral, because that can have health consequences. But most well-constructed diets that have a decent macronutrient balance and are consisted of whole foods are going to get you a good micronutrient balance, which is why they're the rationale for being next up in the pyramid. But they are very important. Then after that, we get to kind of the upper echelon of the stuff that you really don't need to worry about that much and can kind of happen automatically, unless you really have, you're at the point maybe where you've incorporated all these other behaviors and you think, you know what, I could dot some I's and cross some T's because I've got, a couple years under my belt of really having a diet that meets all the ideal requirements for everything lower in the pyramid. And now I want to do some more. Or if you're getting into a competitive sport, or you have really advanced level goals and you do want to try to maximize your outcomes, that's when we get into everything that I put under the category of nutrient timing, which is everything from when do you have protein around training, do you eat different amounts of carbohydrate or fat around training, all the way to potential nonlinear dieting strategies like using refeeds, diet breaks. Anything related to the temporal distribution of nutrients falls under this. Is it worth thinking about modifying the number of meals you eat per day, et cetera, et cetera. And it's important to note that a lot of emphasis goes into this in the general nutrition community, and it is the second to least most important, or the second least important thing in the pyramid, despite the fact that intermittent fasting and all kind and the 5 and 2 diet and the warrior diet, and you can think of many different ones, carb backloading, that are emphasizing this. And yeah, that's not good. And then finally, we have the very top of the pyramid, which you could even argue is not necessary because it's supplemental, is supplements. So dietary supplements are things that should supplement an already set up diet. So it only makes sense that they're at the very top, and something that you would worry about only after everything else is in place and optimized, if you will. So that's the training pyramid. That's the nutrition pyramid. The training pyramid, the equivalent kind of overarching theme is periodization. And periodization is just the concept of manipulating variables to get an outcome that you want while minimizing the risk of burnout and injury. So that encompasses everything. And that's why I use that kind of as the similar theme to behavior and lifestyle. And also in that vein, the very bottom of the pyramid is adherence. So unlike nutrition, you don't have to train. You do have to eat to live. Last time I checked, vegetarians are furious with me right now. But the training is not something that you must do. It's something that you will benefit from. But many people will set themselves up for failure because they will follow a cookie cutter routine, or like you mentioned, something that their influencer says they should do, which has no respect to the fact that they may be a single mother of 3 with 2 full-time jobs, or a full-time student. And this 4-day per week program is really just unrealistic for them and actually is a net negative. And they would be better off finding the most optimal situation given the constraints, maybe only training 2 or 3 days per week. But you just won't find many 2 or 3 day per week training programs out there, because all the people who write training programs are obsessed with lifting, like me. So, I think that's something that really needs to be said. So it starts with the adherence chapter and saying, look, ignore the idea of optimal. This is a pie in the sky idea for researchers to debate about. But even then, we never get there in research. What you need to think about is, what are the constraints of my life? And then within that, what's the best way I can set things up? So it's always that optimal has to be tailored to the pragmatic limits of what you can do. And that chapter is all about that. From there, it goes into volume, intensity, and frequency. And this is basically how much work you're doing, the load and the effort of it, that's intensity, and then how you distribute it, and understanding that manipulating any single one of these automatically changes the other. You can't do a set of 10 with 90% of your 1RM. So that's the inextricable relationship between volume and intensity. Likewise, if you were to train 3 days in a row, training the same exercise to failure, that would produce a different outcome than if you just had a day between them, even if you only train 3 days in the same week. So you can manipulate the same outcome by changing frequency. So understanding how to dose those is the key fundamental aspects of training. And like you mentioned, Marissa, that's where you could stop. You don't necessarily need to worry about progression models or tempo or the nuances of exercise selection. You could just set up a pretty good split and a goal of basic progression. I add load when I can, I add reps when I can, and then I take a break when I feel burnt out, rinse and repeat. And that will get most people to a pretty impressive fitness level. After that, though, then there is the progression chapter where we go into methods of periodization, how to deload, how to structure your training if your goal is to peak strength or to get maximal hypertrophy, and how to think about interrelating that with competitive outcomes. How do I get on the platform? How do I get on stage? What if I am a beginner lifter? What if I'm an intermediate lifter? What if I'm an advanced lifter? How do I even define that? Because it's typically been done pretty poorly on the internet. Like, well, if you can deadlift, here's a great one that I'm sure you guys hate, right? The strength standards that seem to arbitrarily only apply to 180-pound males, right? So what's a good bench? Well, once you get to 2 plates, 225, sweet. Like, okay, great. That's very helpful, but I think I frame it as how quickly can you progress? Because that's ultimately the thing that cuts across everyone who steps in the weight room, is that once you become advanced, it's harder to make progress. So seeing the bar weight go up in smaller increments is a very common experience of advanced lifters. And that's how I define it. And therefore, since you have a smaller signal to measure and there's more noise and you need to put forth a greater effort to induce overload, it changes the game a little bit. You have to think about doing higher volumes, which means higher fatigue, which means different distributions of training, which means a whole different structure to your training. And that's all of that chapter. And again, now we're getting into those kind of higher echelons that are really only applicable if you're trying to take it pretty far or you've mastered everything else. And then after that, we have rest periods and then tempo in that order. And these are things that I kind of describe them as, if you didn't think about it too much and you had decent instruction at the start of your lifting career from a workout partner or a trainer, you're doing it fine, but you could potentially mess it up. And I forgot one layer: exercise selection before both of those. Apologies. Very important. This deals with stuff like specificity, accessory movements, and how to spread out your volume so you get a proportionate hypertrophy. Or if you are a competitor and you compete in a different division, like men's physique or bikini, how would you choose exercise selection that biased your development towards your goals, et cetera, et cetera? How do you break plateaus, and where does that come into it? How do you avoid, overstressing a certain movement pattern if you have, not great lever lengths for squatting, et cetera? All that stuff's in there. Then we get into those 2 top layers of rest periods and tempo, where you were just trying not to screw things up for the most part, with some minor details like, hey, there's an intelligent way to do supersets that might not hurt your performance. There's nuances around rest pause or drop sets and ways to do that effectively or less effectively, and details around that. But again, those are things that I mostly am trying to deal with existing myths that are out there, even though the purpose of the books is not to myth bust, because there is such a immense amount of information, both good and bad. People do have to unlearn things like, oh, I shouldn't eat fruit because it has sugar in it, like you guys talked about. So there is some degree that I must unavoidably address those issues, even though primarily I try to empower people with information, not just simply debunking things. So now it's just, a billion minus 2 things that they don't know what to do.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point, because I think one of the first times that I heard you say, not that you're against myth busting, but more so that you're empowering with information that's actually useful. The first time I heard that, which was probably a couple years ago at this point, I was a little offended, because I was like, huh, I do Mythbuster Monday posts. What does that mean for me? Am I a fraud? Like, is everything that I'm doing wrong? And so I freaked out a little bit, and I was like, okay, this person that I look up to, so what am I doing here, right? And so that's a post that if you are following me and listening to this on Instagram, then you know that this is something that I've made a regular piece of my content. But I think one thing as I've grown in my own journey as a coach and as an educator has been to make that shift as well. Not just, okay, well, this is a myth that is like very frequently perpetuated in this industry, but okay, what do we do with that? What is the applicable information that we now need to use moving forward so that we can actually get things right? And what should we be focusing on? Because a lot of times these Mythbuster Monday things or myths that we are seeing are those tops of the pyramids, right? Like keto is the best diet for fat loss because, and that's not even up high. That's macronutrients, but, that's also a lot of times neglecting adherence for energy balance for a lot of people. So a lot of people will take keto as I can eat as much as I want as long as it's all fat and no carbs. And so we can't take that out of context. And so over time, I've really had to just continually check myself when I'm coaching clients because I think as someone who also likes to get up on stage mostly naked and in a competitive atmosphere and be a little bit neurotic at times when trying to get there, I can get really wrapped up in the weeds too because I love the research and I love the nuances and the details and everything about it. But then when I have a client who just can't seem to be consistent, we can't talk about those things. And so early on in my coaching career, I would say, hey, like, let's do drop sets on the last set of this exercise. And like, let's do an AMRAP or let's do this and that. And I've gotten really far away from that because my population has not changed, but I have been able to adapt to my population a lot better. So instead of focusing on, okay, let's see like how masochistic you can be in the gym, just like me, let's focus on let's get you in the gym like twice a week and like let's start there, or like instead of focusing on I want you eating exactly 30 grams of protein every couple of hours so that you have the optimal muscle protein synthesis rates, I'm thinking, okay, let's just like get your protein to 100 grams a day. Like that's usually one of the biggest struggles that a lot of my clients have, and probably if you're listening to this, a lot of what a lot of you guys might be facing. So I think as someone who tries to communicate this information, it's even hard for me to take a step back and be like, okay, let me just zoom out and remember what's really, really important here.
I think that's really well said. And, I know this is a bit of a tangent away from the pyramids, but I do want to talk about the myth busting thing a little bit.
For it.
Cool. Okay. So when I came into the game, and I'm going to sound like an old grumpy man now, myth busting was basically what you did as an evidence-based professional. You followed the career arc of the guru by being an anti-guru. So you would, it's very similar to coming up on YouTube now. Basically, you just find people to talk shit about, and that's your channel, and then you pivot whatever direction you want, and then burn out in 3 years. But so fantastic strategy. But back in the day, and still to some degree today, you would have the anti-guru who would basically, instead of their ego and high amounts of confidence and maybe their own physique or their own accomplishments, it would be how good of a PubMed ninja are you? How good on the forums or on Facebook at the time could you defeat your foes with citations and logic and all that stuff? And I think it certainly bred a good critical thinking following, but not by intention necessarily. There wasn't a whole lot of time spent building up the critical thinking. It often became, let me check with insert name of evidence-based professional and see what they think about that. And I think I was one of those followers, and I steadily was able to build up my critical thinking skills by emulating, but I never really got taught to do it. So instead of basically having a couple people who I follow, who I would believe their whack-a-mole response to all the information that came up, I thought, what I want to embed in the pyramids is helping people to ask better questions. Because there's nothing to prevent somebody from going, oh, Eric Helms, he's got a PhD, oh, he's a competitive bodybuilder. Like, the standard way that we view people is not everyone, but many people in the fitness industry will look at the letters after your name, your accomplishments, who have you coached, how good do you look on the gram, what titles do you have, how strong are you, And I tick some boxes there, and that's intentional. And I understand that I am playing the game to some degree. I don't like that I have to do it. I don't like that my abs gives me more credibility than some professor I know who is actually far more intelligent than I am. But I understand that that is a sign of credibility for a lot of people. And then I hope that once they come in and they start reading or listening to me, they start to shift the way they view what is good information. And I talk about that a lot in the introduction of the books to, hey, instead of going, should I do 5x5 or 3x8? Thinking, well, what is the difference between those and why does this matter? And in moving people to ask better questions. And the pyramid exists as a lens to view information. So, like you said, if someone hears a claim about keto, and even if the science is good, right? If or let's say convincing, because it's not good if anyone claims what you said, but if it's the science is convincing to someone who's not trained in science, which is a very understandable thing to happen, if they go, hold on, but they're saying this breaks energy balance, that would mean it somehow keto invalidates the pyramid. And I've got a pretty reasonable argument here as to why, thermodynamics applies to some degree to the human body. Big surprise. That can't be true. Instead of me going, hey, here's the energy balance chapter, and I'm going to debunk all the people who've said, energy balance doesn't matter. Oh, it's not a closed system, yada, yada, yada. Or my chapter on carbs was just about debunking keto, and my chapter on fat was debunking whatever. I think the if you're not going to be a myth buster, you have to build critical thinking up in people, and that's a more challenging thing to do, but it is a much more lasting impression you have on people that allows them to then go be a messenger, and they can now, like I said, be empowered, not be victimized by all the BS that gets peddled out there. So I know that was a bit of a long tangent. I apologize, but there's nothing inherently wrong with busting myths, and I think it's especially important when there is harmful things out there, or when things are like at the cutting edge of science that's very difficult for people to understand. Like there's a reason why, I do mass, interpret research for people. I understand that this is a skill set that I've developed over time. But I think all the time that could be spent attacking every new fad that comes out could really be better spent in giving people some basic BS detection skills for what does come out. And it's just basically a priority for the practitioner and the other influencers out there.
I love what you said about that. And I think it's a really good point. And one of the things I was thinking of when you're talking was I have a client that comes to mind who is very, very anxious when it comes to a lot of different things in her training aspect. And one of the things I like to reiterate to people is you could have the absolute 100% best program. Like if you follow this to a T, you're going to see all these great results. But if you don't like it and you're not going to adhere to it, then that doesn't matter. So if you follow a training program that's maybe not as great, but it's still something that you enjoy and you're going to do consistently, you're going to see far better progress on that than you would on this perfect training block. So trying to get away from what you see on Instagram as the next best thing and really, again, focusing on the basics. And I feel like sometimes that's just not sexy and that doesn't sell, and you can't gain a whole bunch of followers with your swipe videos and you're coming up with whatever new exercise you just saw. But I feel like that kind of helps someone who's beginning their fitness journey and really just kind of taking a step back and trying to, again, like you said, apply those critical thinking skills and be able to say, is this what I need to focus on, or is this pulling me away from my ultimate goal?
Well said. I totally agree.
Yeah. And I think that it's really important that we as coaches and practitioners set an example. So like one thing that I force myself to do, because I'm anti-fitspo at this point, and so I'm like, I don't want to post my body or my workouts, I'm kind of against that, but to an extent we have to play the game a little bit to get people creeping through the door, right? And so I acknowledge that, and one of the things that I do is I'll record a bunch of my training each day and I'll put it up on my Instagram story. But it's always the same thing every week for like 8 to 12 weeks at a time. And I make sure to make a point of that because, again, it's not sexy. And you don't gain followers by, posting the same exact swipe video every single Monday of your leg day. That's exactly the same. That would be an awful looking feed. But that's the reality of really just hammering the basics. And I kind of want to go back to that it's not even a tangent on myth busting, because I think it's really important that we acknowledge, I am a culprit of, myth busting. I think it is important to start that conversation, but then also ask the question, what do we do once that myth is busted? Because, like you said, asking better questions, being more critical, analyzing things in your own context. And then if we don't do that, we see things being taken in the opposite direction. And so, one example that comes to mind is when clean eating was debunked, and we went to if it fits your macros, and everyone just took that all the way to the other side of the spectrum, and they went, okay, so if clean eating doesn't matter and all that matters is energy balance, and so now we're just at the bottom of the pyramid, and with the macros at the second level, that's all that matters. And the other three levels might as well just not exist, and that is where people took it. And so when we say, a majority of our work working with general population clients is on those first two levels, it doesn't necessarily mean that the rest don't matter. And so, and I've referenced this in other podcasts that we've recorded already, but like, we tend to go from this one side that's an extreme all the way to the other side that's an extreme, when in reality we really need to find some kind of a balance and a trade-off in the middle. And so yes, energy balance is what's most important for when we're trying to reach a certain destination, but let's also not forget the behavior and the lifestyle, like you said. So does our behavior and lifestyle encourage healthy living? Are we fueling ourselves with food sources that make us feel good and productive and give us energy to do our day-to-day activities? And that kind of falls into the micronutrient category, but also just is an all-encompassing way of living.
No, that's really well said. I think it's always been a challenge for me, because I have what I describe as a quantitative bias. I like to manipulate small variables to change my body for a specific outcome, and then I got into research. So if there's anything that would enforce it, doing quantitative research would. But I think it's important to remember that you don't have to tell people to eat. They will do that on their own. That's a part of every society I'm aware of. And even if you don't track your macros, you do consume protein, carbohydrates, fat, and calories. And one thing that we must acknowledge as scientists that we often don't, and especially as coaches, is that by measuring a variable, you are changing it if you're measuring that in humans. So we have a lot of data now that shows that if you track carbohydrates, fat, and protein, that can have an impact on your psychology, and it can have an impact on your eating. And indeed, you can focus on just the behavioral side of the coin and get outcomes on just well, not just, but you can get outcomes and changes in macronutrients and energy intake, et cetera. For example, intuitive eating, or whether weight neutral approaches, mindful eating, things that are not intended to result in changes in macronutrient in the diet often result in higher diet quality and better satiety, which results in sometimes lower energy intake. And you'll see a population that has been trending upwards in terms of weight gain become weight neutral, occasionally lose weight. It's not the goal, but you will also see better markers in terms of physiological outcomes. So I think that's something I really try to touch on, especially in the second editions, is that, hey, just because macronutrients and energy are the base of the pyramid doesn't necessarily mean that we manipulate them by putting every piece of your meal on a plate and then on a scale and tracking everything and weighing it. And that became a really big focus. And I think it's an important aspect of it as well. And that's why the behavior and lifestyle kind of has to be seen as that overarching theme always, is that yes, you're focusing on energy balance, you're focusing on macronutrients, but does that disrupt behavior and lifestyle? All right, now you've actually violated the pyramid. It's something to think about. And sometimes the goal requires some disruption of behavior and lifestyle. Like, for example, if you want to be shredded on stage, that's not something that just happens accidentally, and it does have costs, as we all know. So now I really like what you said, in that people typically, when myth busting is done, it becomes, because it's done not very critically or intentionally, well, if not A, then B. And that is a very normal human shortcut. But we don't have to myth bust in such a way that it's just, let's tear that down and then veer left hard. We can myth bust in ways that are informative. When you myth bust something, you can explain why it doesn't make sense, what aspect of it you understood, and then maybe a better way to do it. And you can also, instead of just tearing down an argument, you can steelman it. Imagine if the war, the early 2000s and late 90s that had been against clean eating had been, there's some really great aspects of this. Processed foods do have X, Y, and Z issues. There are problems with satiety control. If you're not eating a really basic kind of whole food diet, you're going to have higher passive consumption, lower dietary fiber. You're probably going to eat lower micronutrients, all that stuff. However, it is not really good when we focus on seeing these foods as magic. Like, I must eat tilapia at the end of my diet or something like that, or I can never eat X, Y, and Z. Imagine if the conversation had been like that, where we acknowledged all those aspects rather than just saying, this is BS. Like, why do you want everyone to eat rice cakes, fish, and broccoli all the time? This is trash. And then let me throw up a picture of me eating, insert, candy or Twinkie or something like that, just to show that I can, I still got in shape. So I don't know how productive that was. I do think it was useful shock value because it did change people's perspective. If you thought it was impossible to get shredded eating a certain way and people proved you wrong, then you were forced to reevaluate your worldview. But at the same time, like you said, there are many benefits to eating whole foods, and it is something that the answer was not, let's all track our macros forever, because that is his own whole set of problems, doesn't it? So yeah, well said.
Eric, I believe the magic food you were searching for was Pop-Tart.
Of course,
So.
100%. That is how we got shredded in the mid 2000s. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, and that's one thing that I've come across as I'm making Mythbusters, or I'm, because I still make these posts. But what happens is they turn into concept reviews, and then I get frustrated because I only have 10 slides and only so many characters in my caption. So now these posts are turning into, okay, well, if it's not clean eating, then let's break down like basically the first two levels of the pyramid, and then maybe the third if I have room on my slides, and then I'll kind of do an overview of it in the caption, and then I'll talk on my story about it for like 10 minutes. And then at this point I've spent 2 hours on one piece of content that like 20 people are going to save, and then and then they're not going to come back to it. So that's why we started a podcast, so we can actually talk about these things at length. And I really like your point about the just tracking when we're talking about energy balance and macronutrients, because that implies that we must track macros, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And I think that really plays into one part of the books that I think is really important for both the training and the nutrition, which is the realistic, enjoyable, and flexible components of training, and the accuracy, flexibility, and consistency trade-offs when it comes to nutrition. And so with the accuracy, the more accurate you are, the less flexible you are, because if you're more accurate, that means you're cooking everything yourself, and that means you're only eating the food that you prepare. And I see this start to occur with clients who might be tracking macros for the first time, and then we have to inch them away from that edge. And then, the more accurate and consistent that you are, that flexibility dwindles away. But then the more flexible you are, maybe the less consistent you are. And those things all interplay with each other with diet. And then with the training aspect as well. So we have to kind of, I think those play into the behavior and lifestyle aspect of the pyramid, where it really is the overarching, okay, well, what about your quality of life? Like, are you going crazy, or are you able to do this and also stay sane and also maintain your relationships and everything like that?
No, absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of this comes down to what they call in goal setting and behavior-based research, reducing friction. You'll hear people talk about that a lot. And if you think about, when do people who have good intentions, know what they're doing, set up a solid plan, even have good guidance, when do they fall off track? If we think about nutrition, it's often the weekend, holidays, or vacations, right? And we think about training, it is very similar times. And the the acronym refing yourself, realistic, enjoyable, and flexible, and the continuum between flexibility and accuracy and nutrition are basically anticipating future friction. Because this is something that we've all seen as trainers, that when someone sets up a 5-day training plan, they're all about it. And people, like, when people are motivated, it's a very challenging thing because they want to change everything. They want to go all in. They're ready to change everything, destroy my fridge, get a new one. I don't know why I'm getting a new fridge, but everything in there needs to change. And why not change the fridge as well? I'm going to get a gym membership. I'm going to do classes on my off days. I'm going to do, train Monday, Wednesday, Friday, classes, Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday, Saturday, and then Sunday is going to be, yoga or something like that. They go hardcore and they get all the supplements. And then, because this is all kind of this one big effort, it's easy to be disrupted and then to fall off because it is all at once. There's no time to really devote energy and thought and emotion to one of those behaviors that then becomes an ingrained new part of their process. And I've always found myself in a difficult position when I was a trainer, is I don't want to discourage this emphasis and this effort and this willingness to just let's go all in. But I also don't want to be blind to the fact that this is the fourth time they've done this, many times, and that I've seen this happen before. I've seen this speed up to 60, blow a tire out, and be like, screw it, I don't even want to drive anymore. So how do I mold that? And I think it's basically anticipating future issues and emphasizing from the start, all right, this needs to be realistic, enjoyable, and flexible. We don't need to be myopic. I don't want to try to tear you down. I do want to direct that energy into something that will be robust against those common things that come up. So if we are, tracking macros, eating a certain amount of calories, following a meal plan, whatever paradigm you use, what's the game plan for when the holidays come? What's the game plan for when your partner says, hey, do you want to go out to eat on Saturday? How much resilience are you going to need just to follow this plan? And okay, if willpower, no matter how good it is, runs out on everybody. The saying in like military movies, like, everybody breaks from torture. Like, if you are white knuckling a diet, everybody eventually breaks. That's why bodybuilders aren't shredded year round, right? It's not for lack of wanting it. So I think we have to think about, all right, so if I have a short-term goal of losing X amount of weight, it's okay if that's challenging. That's all good. And even acceptance and commitment therapy would suggest that that's a good thing to acknowledge. However, I need to be thinking the entire time about what's the game plan afterwards. I can't be tracking my macros for my whole life. How do I make these changes and the things I'm learning from this period where I'm tracking macros, if the goal is weight loss ostensibly, become things that are incorporated so maintenance is a reality and it's not something that takes effort. Likewise, how do I have a training plan that has inbuilt flexibility and is something that I enjoy so that I can feel like I'm still on plan when vacation comes, when holiday comes, or whatever, or when just life is normally happening. And I think that is something that is typically lacking when people go it alone or don't get good guidance. And that's why I wanted that to be upfront in both books.
And that's a really good point. And one of the things that I know that Marissa and I bring up with our clients is, I'll have clients that have anxiety about going out to dinner and not being able to track something 100% accurate, or going on vacation. And they're like, well, how is this going to mess up my progress? And one of the things I like to think about is, what are your goals right now? Do you have a wedding coming up in a couple months? Because my advice to you is probably going to be different than if you're in a maintenance phase, or if you are trying to put on muscle. And so it's kind of like, hey, what are your goals? And so what can we do that it's a little bit more realistic and flexible for you right now? Because it's, like you said, it's not realistic to live that prep life, 365, because that's not realistic. You're going to have to go out to dinner with your spouse every now and then or with some friends. So we like to use macro tracking as a tool, and it's something that you can implement if you have very specific goals, if you want to, get a little more dialed in. But if you don't need to and you are just maintaining, then yeah, you probably can enjoy a little bit more flexibility in your life.
Yeah. Oh my God, Eric, you just spoke to my soul about all of that. Holy shit. So that is the number one thing that I run into when it comes to starting new clients is they always hit me with that dialogue of I am 100% in. I'm all in when I start. I'm so excited to make all these changes. And I'm like, "Huh, I love that energy, but like okay, but let's like funnel that, right? Exactly what you said. Let's channel that energy towards something that is more productive in terms of being able to apply it in every context. And then, I think another thing that we're talking about with tracking macros, I like to have conversations with clients about accepting something that might not be sustainable within a sustainable framework. So exactly what you said about, making sure that we're taking the bits and pieces and the habits and the principles of what we're doing with tracking macros in a bigger picture. So if I have someone who says, okay, well, I tracked macros for 3 months because we just dieted and now I'm reverse dieting and I'm practicing more flexibility, but I'm nervous about going out to eat. How would you suggest I handle this, or a trip over the weekend or whatever it might be? My question to them is, ask yourself, how would you handle this if you didn't have this knowledge of tracking macros, but like, maybe you knew those principles, but like how would you order if you just wanted to make a good decision in the context of what good meant to you at that given time? And so we're taking the principles of like, okay, let's center our meals around protein, let's eat a vegetable here and there, and then let's try to like stop eating when we're full and start eating when we're hungry, and let's not ignore that, because I think we can get so blinded by and this is kind of turned into a discussion about tracking macros and balance and lifestyle, but I like where it's going because that's a big part of the balance and lifestyle portion of the nutrition pyramid. But taking those principles and really focusing on what am I taking away from this? Like Christina said, these are tools in your tool belt, and you can bring them back whenever you need to use them, whenever you need to dial in for a diet, or you can put them away when you want to be more flexible. But it's about, and I think the overarching piece of this conversation is really about always being aware of your own context, and your context is ever changing, and that is a conversation that I have over and over and over again with clients, and I'm constantly asking them, well, you're asking me this question, but does it make sense in the context that you're in right now? You just had a baby and you're asking me how to look like you did when you were in college and taking part-time classes and working out 4 hours a day. That doesn't make sense in your context now. And so I'm always having that conversation. I think it's one of the biggest takeaways that we can take from this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think being able to take the framework and apply it to your situation is the holy grail of all this stuff. And it's not easy. It's challenging, and that's, I think, probably the value of coaches. And that's some of the people who have given me the most positive feedback on the books is those who don't just use it for themselves. Those who need to have, like you said, a tool belt so they can apply all the various concepts through their own system and the individual context of all the people who come to them. So, I mean, that is basically what coaching is when you think about it, through the various domains of someone's life, and you're trying to help them figure out the pathway from X to Z, and that's not Y to Z. I don't know the alphabet, but getting from one place to another, in their own life, for sure.
A to Z, maybe.
Yeah, apparently they only hired me in like the last 10 minutes of their goal in this example. So
Yeah. And so to kind of just get to one more point that I really wanted to touch on in this discussion was optimal. And we kind of touched on optimal a little bit earlier in this discussion. But I think it plays really nicely into where we just left off, with, okay, we're matching what we're doing with our training and our nutrition to our context. For training, that means adherence. So if you can only get to the gym 3 times a week, if you're a full-time student and working full-time and you have kids, that's great. That's the best thing that you can do in your context. And this was something I was kind of thinking about as you were talking about it earlier, was optimal really is this concept that we put on a pedestal, but ultimately it is just what is the best thing that we can do in our context right now. And if we can do that, then we are doing what's optimal for us. And that can be kind of a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people, I think, because we want to all treat ourselves like we're pro athletes and like our lives revolve around training and nutrition. Um, and not a lot of people can say that that's their reality. So I think being realistic, and that is, refing yourself, being realistic with your expectations of what optimal is really going to look like for you. Well, first of all, it sets the bar in a nice place where you can actually hit it. And then, second of all, you can feel successful doing that.
Yeah, I think it also, we tend to, I think most people are, they acknowledge if you ask them the question, like, do you see yourself growing and changing and having new motivations and new capability in the future? And they go, yeah. But unprompted, we don't really think of things like that. We tend to think of our current situation as the reality moving forward. And one of the things I like to, help people understand when they are coming to grips with, man, I have been program hopping. Geez, I really have been going on a diet and falling off and trying again. Like one of the things I noticed when I was doing all these Skype consultations is I had so many people who had tried to get to a certain body fat level and maintain it. And this was like their 6th time trying to do it. So it's a difficult conversation to go, well, hey, maybe, 15% body fat isn't something you can maintain. Maybe we need to be a little bit higher than that. Like, at what point are you not food focused? Because that's the point where you probably need to be to live your life like a normal human who's not, white knuckling it, or, I just can't buy peanut butter. I got to keep a lock on the fridge. Like, that's not a way to live, that's something that can happen during contest prep that we joke about, and it's funny, but not lifestyle really. So anyway, in all those examples, I think it's difficult for people to acknowledge that you're only going to get better at this if you do it right. So right now, what is a hard pill to swallow is that 3 sessions per week is what you can consistently do. And you really feel like that's not optimal. Well, hey, the beautiful thing about self-efficacy, and that's the belief in that you can do more and be better, is that it is a snowball effect. It's not a chicken or egg, it's both. So each time you set up a pin and you knock it down, you grab a piece of low-hanging fruit, the next low-hanging fruit can actually be a branch higher. And I think we touched on this earlier, kind of metaphorically, that you can climb up the pyramid as far as you want, but you get to exist past that first climb. So if you are someone who is just entering, the realm of deciding you want to lift weights and change your body and get serious about this, and you start with 3 days per week, and you start, basically just tracking calories and protein, and then you get away from tracking and you're just kind of, eating a little more intuitively based on habits. And then you decide, what, I do want to make a push, a conscious push, where this year I'm going to really focus on gaining muscle. And you know what I should probably do? I probably want to track, my protein timing a little more. I want to make sure I get equal servings. I want to look at my quality. I want to try to get a little more nutrition around training. I want to take creatine. And you know what? I'm going to try to make my schedule work so I can get 4 days a week of training, and I want to increase my volume a little bit. You can do that. And if that's a very reasonable place to go from, if you're training 3 days a week and you're already tracking, in a broader sense and have some habits established. But that's not reasonable if you just started lifting last week and you just learned what the macronutrients are. And you're likely to fail trying to go that far. But if you're bridging from each one of those experiences, all of a sudden you get to do more. And I reflect on my own athletic career as a lifter, and I'm doing stuff that I wouldn't recommend to others, like trying to optimize my sleep hygiene. And I've got like a Fitbit, and I'm trying to get my step count up, and I'm trying to make sure I get, more fruits and vegetables, and making sure I'm more consistent with hydration. And thinking about doing things like post-activation potentiation. I'll have like a top set and then back off sets, things that are probably pretty small in terms of their effect and their importance in the pyramid. But I don't really know how not to be doing all the other things that we've talked about, because I've been living that life for 15 years. So that is a place that you want to eventually get to, but you never get to it if you shoot for it at the start and keep start stopping and failing. You just keep rehashing those old tread waters, and eventually it becomes this almost PTSD experience with nutrition and training. So I think it's really important to, acknowledge that it may be not exactly as exciting and sexy as your start you wanted it to be, where you don't go from being someone who didn't even know what barbells and dumbbells the difference was, to then being the fitness star who trains all the time, and you just live in Gymshark gear, and you blow up, and it's this hero's journey of ascension to fitness. Instead, it's like, I train 3 times a week, and I'm tracking my protein, I'm trying to get 100 grams. That may not be as exciting, but just think of that there actually is a journey, and you can move forward and keep incorporating new things, and you get to be that snowball rolling down the hill towards your goals, which I think is the way I frame it when people give a little bit of pushback there.
And I think that goes back to that kind of black and white mentality that if I can't be optimal, or if I can't be doing every aspect of the pyramid, then I'm just not going to do anything at all, because why does it matter? And so it's like, you have I have another client that comes to mind where it's like, if she has one thing off plan, well, then her day's ruined. So therefore I'm going to eat everything in my pantry, because this is my one opportunity to kind of do that. And it doesn't matter if I'm, 10 carbs over, I'm now going to be, 300. Or so it's kind of that analogy. I don't know if that's the right term, but if, you have a hole in your tire, you're not going to go out and stab the other 3. So just trying to, again, build off of those small habits that still can make a really big difference. So if maybe 120 grams of protein is optimal, but you can only get in 100, well, that's still really good. And so don't freak out about that 20 and overanalyze it and, worry about, well, when am I going to take my creatine at what time it's like, just focus on the basics and you're still going to make great progress, especially if you're adherent and you continue to do it over time.
Yeah. And I think what we said about opening up capacity doors over time, or just, titrating in new habits very slowly. This is something that I ask a lot of my clients to do is, hey, let's pick one thing that you're going to focus on this upcoming week. Like, let's just focus on that one thing. And I want you to nail it every day. And if we can do that, then we can add something on, or it might even just be, one thing for 2 weeks. And, until that person doesn't know how not to do that, like you said. And I think that is something that I've lived through. So I have not been doing this for 15 years. I'm a little bit younger than both of you guys, but I, have had epiphanies almost like throughout my journey about, what living this lifestyle really is. Because first I started off and I was just gung-ho, and I was like, well, tracking macros is a new thing that like Lane Norton coined, and like, all of this new information, and like I was big into the myth busting like atmosphere and culture. Went hard on that, did my first competitions, and then had my first off season, and that was like a slap in the face, of course. And then trying to figure out, okay, how do I live without tracking macros, but also like not getting totally fat? And then trying to figure that out, feeling like I had it figured out. And then the next year, competed in 2018, and then this past 2 years, I guess, since 2020 just concluded, these past 2 years or a little bit over that have been like the real epiphany of like, okay, now I'm like 2.5 years into like what I like to call my 5-year off season. And I'm finally like really getting like, okay, this makes sense. This is how I should have been doing it the last time around. And this is living the lifestyle. And so when we're talking about like titrating in these habits slowly over time, it really could take a long time to build up to not knowing how not to do this. So Eric, like Eric said, he's been doing this for 15 years. I've maybe only been doing it for 6, but it does take a lot of time and patience. So like wherever you are right now, if that's, hey, I train 3 times a week and I just try to get over 100 grams of protein a day, and that's where I'm at. And maybe your physique or your strength is not where you would want it to be. We can't just have this narrow-minded look at our present reality, because we always try to remind people of this with our Transformation Tuesdays and our side by side photos of like, this was me 5 years ago and this is me now. But like, I like, I really do like those posts and the idea behind it, because it's reminding people to be very patient with the process, and realizing that where you are now is just a stepping stone, maybe up the pyramid, maybe not, but to a future self that you would be really proud of.
Yeah, so two things. One, probably the more important one. I actually started training when I was 5, so I'm only 20 years old, Marissa. So I'm very offended that you would call me old. Um, that's not true. But yeah, so the serious comment is that I think patience is never motivating. It is a reality. We know it's true, but we know that in hindsight. We know it because of the mistakes we made, and when we failed multiple times from being impatient, and then we just had to be like, all right, God damn it, I guess I'll just be patient about this. But what I find is motivating is when you tie into the passion of the person. Like, you love progressing every time you step in the gym. You love learning all these new things. You're obsessed about this. Like, your partner, and this is totally not my personal experience, gets mad at you because you won't stop reading these articles. We're supposed to be sitting down doing Netflix and chill right now. What are you doing on your computer again? Random example, never happened to me. I never got an ultimatum from my wife. And that type of energy, I think, is really excited about the idea that, oh, this experience can continue. This journey is not just right now. You can be 10 years from now still leveling up. And I think, sometimes I frame it, and I'm going to expose how much of a nerd I am, kind of like a role-playing game. Like, you're level 1 right now, and you've got your, you got your rapier and your buckler, but you can have a tower shield, and you can have like a mithril blade, and you can be like a level 20th, multi-class, fighter mage, and you've got a long way to go. And you get to keep leveling up. And each time it's going to feel good. It's going to feel like this. You're going to see that next step, rather than you'll eventually get to where you want to be, but it'll take 15 years of hard work. Those are the same message, but very different. And one is just like, nah, I don't want to hear that. And the other one is, oh, cool. Like, so there's a lot of different, opportunities for growth here. And maybe I just need to focus on the first few steps in front of me, but they're all steps. So I totally agree. And I think framing is everything.
Yeah. I think, like I was saying, you hit those highs, you hit those epiphanies every so often where you're like, wow, I really love this, or wow, like this really is working. And those come every so often. And so they'll come along the way. It's not that it's such delayed gratification that you literally have to wait until the very end, because like Christina and I always talk about, it's about the process. It's not about the outcome. So if we keep our process focused goals at the forefront, then we're going to keep getting those highs from achieving those process oriented goals on a day-to-day basis. And it's funny that you say that, because earlier I just came back a couple weeks ago from visiting Christina, where she and her husband live. And there was one, I believe it was either a morning or an evening, but I had Mass open on my laptop and I was reading it. And I was like, hey, like, did you know that like you don't have to get like super lean to have like a really successful bulk? And Christina was like, shut up, we're playing Taboo. And that was our conversation.
That's amazing.
So I'm right there with you, and totally not impeding on my relationships or anything. Yeah.
P ratios, the most important topic of conversation at any time. It's so true. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have one final question for you, I think, to wrap up this conversation, and that would be one question that we ask all of our guests on this podcast. We're a relatively new podcast, so we are, creating a tradition here. But we just wanted to, and this works very well with the context of our discussion, ask for your best advice for your clients, people listening, and anyone out there just trying to live a better lifestyle. What is your advice for them to see their best results, to have a healthy and sustainable lifestyle?
Yeah, that ties in really nicely to what we're talking about. I think I'm going to kind of go in the same vein. I don't know if this is the best advice, but it certainly seems like we've built a strong rationale for it. But it's to have, a growth mindset, to acknowledge that you are at a point right now when you've decided you want to make changes, and that often happens because there's something about yourself you don't like. And I could very easily say, oh, it's better to come from a place of I am worthy to be better and empowerment. And you can nod at me and go, yeah, but I still don't like this about myself. And I think just be open to the possibility that it could be different, that you may be coming from a place where you could come from abundance, where you do like what you see in the mirror, or maybe you do think you could be better, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you hate where you're at now. And try to just imagine what it would be like to move forward from a place of I'm such a badass that I can do more, and I want to see how far I can take it, rather than moving from a place of I want to be different. And this is actually coming out in the next issue of Mass. We looked at New Year's resolutioners' goals, and people were more successful when they had what is framed as a approach-oriented New Year's resolution rather than avoidance. And that means I'm going to do something rather than I want to stop doing something. Or if you want to look at it more from a existential place, I want to become something rather than I want to stop being this thing or this part of me that I don't like. So I think, honestly, that's the root of everything. That's going to shape your behaviors, the way you react to failures, the way you interact with others. And I can't emphasize how important it is. So I would put that forth as my nomination, given the context of what we've talked about previously.
I love the approach versus avoid. And I'm sure once that comes out in Mass, I will hear about it from Marissa.
In the middle of Taboo.
Yes. The 1 week I get with her a year.
Let me just preface. It was before we started playing Taboo.
Yes.
She was getting the box out, and I was just idly laying there. I wasn't reading in the middle of Taboo. That would be rude.
So you feel like you have been wronged and mischaracterized. That's what I'm hearing by this. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, I think we touched on a lot of really, really good points. So just to summarize real quickly, so we came about your introduction and how you got into where you are now, as a writer and bodybuilder, powerlifter, researcher, literally everything. And then we talked about the background of the pyramids and why you kind of created them, what was the need at the time. And basically it was, the framework to how to have a conversation and help people kind of set their priorities. And then we talked about the strength nutrition, the muscle and strength nutrition and the training pyramids. Talked about myth busting and, when people fall off track and how to kind of go back to that ref, which is a realistic, enjoyable, and flexible, and talking about self-efficacy and how it develops over time. And your advice, which I absolutely love, is to have a growth mindset and be open to something different. So is there anything else you want to add? Is there anything else you want to plug today? We'll definitely link your books in the description of the podcast so people can definitely get their hands on that.
I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate your guys' time. I think this was a really unique conversation and framing of it all. And I think it went in ways that will help both coaches and people who have their own goals hopefully avoid certain mindsets or mistakes that are unfortunately all too common. So I got nothing left to plug. I appreciate you guys having a whole episode about my book. So that's, it's basically just a huge ad that no, I'm just kidding. But no, I really appreciate you guys have done a lot of plugging of my material, and I hope people do enjoy the books. And if they do want to watch an old S3 recorded portrait mode on a chair in a whiteboard room video version of this before you buy them, you can get the version 1.0 that's still available on YouTube on our channel if you want to check it out before you drop any coin. So just want to say thanks.
Yeah, so we will definitely link the YouTube channel in the description as well. So if they want to find you on other social media, where can they find you?
Absolutely, yeah. So the one-stop shop for finding anything I do is 3dmusclejourney.com. You can find links to the books, mass, which we referenced, my blogs, our YouTube channel, all that stuff. And then for more day-to-day content, not that I post every day, I'm a bad influenza. You can follow me at Helms3DMJ on Instagram, where I post links to podcasts I do like this, research that's come out, or the thoughts and reflections. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Well, awesome. So we hope that you guys enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You can find Eric on all the social medias that he just listed, and you can find me at Christy Lynn Fit, and Marissa is at Marissa Roy Fitness. And thank you guys so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you back next week.